I'm Jason Bulmahn, Director of Game Design at Paizo and creator of the Pathfinder role-playing game. Today, in this design musing, I want to talk to you about knowing the market for your game and trying to figure out whether or not your game is going to meet the market that you currently live in and the market you want the game to serve. So, first off, it's good to understand that there's two kind of prime areas I'm going to talk about in this video. The first is players and who is the player market that you're aiming the game at. And the second is what are the other games in the industry or in your niche that you're going to be creating your game to join. In some cases compete, but in other cases trying to find your own place within that genre. Starting out, I want to talk about knowing your players and how you can ensure that the game is meeting their desires and what they want. Now, this is really something you should be thinking about from the moment you begin designing your game. Ultimately, knowing who your game is for is really, really important to some of the decisions you might make when designing your game. Now, you can kind of come at this from the opposite side, which is design a game and figure out what market the game is for, but I don't really recommend it. That's some advanced level, and you can work that way, but you might find that you've made a game that ultimately doesn't have a market. So instead, let's think about, as you're building your game, envisioning who it is that is playing this game and what will they want out of the game. So the first question you have to ask yourself is kind of, who is this game for? Is it for young people, old people, busy people, people with lots of time on their hands? There's a lot of different ways you can envision the audience, and the audience doesn't have to necessarily live in one narrow band. It could be a very broad slice, right? I'm aiming this game for anyone who likes science fiction, right? That's a very broad category. It's, children like spaceships, old people like Star Wars, right? So there's plenty of different ways you can kind of look at how that audience might be and how big or in some cases how narrow they might be. I think, you can build a game for a very specific interest. Oh, I'm going to design a game that's all about, Napoleonic warfare, using, chits and card mechanics, right? That you've automatically now selected kind of a narrow band because that's not something that a lot of people have interest in. Or does your game maybe, have a message? Are you trying to get everyone to understand something by playing the game? That's going to narrow you down a little bit too in different ways, right? I think, especially in the past couple of years, we've seen some games specifically designed with a message in mind that are there to kind of teach us about environmental awareness. There's a number of board games that have tried to do that in the past couple of years. And understanding who is going to be interested in that game is kind of fundamentally speaking to you as the game designer as to what the market is that you're trying to design for. So you have to kind of think about the people who are going to be playing your game, and as you're designing it, you're going to want to make decisions based on who that market is, right? So if you have some very young players, if that's kind of in your target audience, you might want to consider a game that is less expensive, right? A 16-year-old kid maybe isn't going to want to drop $120 on a super complicated board game. Maybe a lighter $20 game is something they're going to be interested in. Are they, busy? Do they need a game that's going to be easier to learn? Right? That's one direction you can take your game. You can try and make it simpler for people to get into the game because you are designing it for people who you envision are very busy. It's a casual game and not maybe a hobby or lifestyle game. So you're going to want to make that barrier to entry basically as low as possible. Maybe instead your audience is one that you think will treat this as a hobby and a lifestyle. Right? So you want to design a game that gives them plenty to invest in. So in this case, you're going to want to make the game more robust. You're going to want to add more rules to it, more subsystems, more different ways to participate. A lot of miniatures games kind of go down this route, right? They offer you, you can not just play the game, you can assemble armies and paint them and do all those sorts of things. This also might influence how the game is designed for its intended playtime, right? If you are building a game that's designed for people on the go, you're going to want to cut out a bunch of optional rules and ways to extend the game and try and make it as fun and quick as possible. On the flip side, you can certainly extend a lot of games by adding more turns to it, giving it more complex strategy, giving people more things to do. All of this kind of speaks to you envisioning your audience and what they want out of the game and using that knowledge to tailor the game to them. You could limit the number of components, you could add a quick start, you can put in advanced rules, you can offer different ways to play. All of these are toggles that you have as a game designer to tailor the game to your audience. The second part of this is understanding the industry and the environment that you're building your game for. You need to go out there and kind of learn and understand what other games are out there that are similar to yours in terms of audience and scope. In a previous video about how I got started in the game industry, I talk about one of the most important things a game designer can do, which is play games, play lots of games. And this is why this is so important. Understanding what other games are out there, what's already been done, is critical when designing your game. You want to look at those games and you want to learn from them. You want to figure out what parts do they include, what components do they contain for their cost. How does that cost situate them in the market? What type of mechanics are they emphasizing? Is it lots of cards? Is it lots of dice? Is it lots of turn worker placement style games? Is it a more complicated, role-playing game or a war game? What's the pieces? What are the components that are being designed and added to the game to make it appeal to that market? And just as important, what kind of things do they avoid? What things do they specifically not include? Certainly when you get into board games, you can see many dividing lines about what pieces are included in games for some audiences versus what pieces are included for games for different audiences. You get into more kind of hardcore Euro game kind of things and you see a lot less dice and things like that, a lot less random mechanics than you do in some of the more lighter, simpler, fun games, which emphasize a lot more random chance and circumstance than kind of in-depth tactical strategy. The goal here isn't to copy any of your competitors or other games in the market. Your goal is to understand what it is that they are doing, where their strengths lie, and where they might not be doing other things. The point here is to find a place where your game can thrive. If you're going head-to-head with an incredibly popular game in a market, you're going to want to make sure that you position yourself to offer something that that game does not offer. Because otherwise, you're basically asking people to abandon the big brand to come play your game, right? If you're, going up against Munchkin, I suggest you make sure that you offer something that that game does not offer. It's light, it involves dice, it involves heroes, it's fantasy, well, these days it's also science fiction and Call of Cthulhu and everything else. It's kind of the game that has everything. But it's a light expression, and if you were going to go into that market, you would want to look at ways to position yourself as not just a clone of that game, because you're never going to win that battle. So you're going to want to make changes to your game to make sure that it's new, it's innovative, that it's doing different kinds of things. So once you've kind of taken a look, you also are going to want to see what the current trends are, right? There's an element of this that is understanding what the trends in the industry are and recognizing where your game fits into those trends. That might tell you that your game is kind of in the moment, right? If you're far enough along in your design and you're seeing other games that are similar, maybe you're part of an ongoing trend. Although if you're much early in your design and you see a whole bunch of games coming out in that market, maybe you're too late. Maybe by the time your game is done and hits market, you'll be after the time. There are some advantages and disadvantages to that, but it's a thing you have to weigh. A few years ago, I was working on a game where it was a co-op game where everyone was a crewman on a starship and you were trying to survive a bunch of zany adventures. But I went to some trade shows later that year and saw 3 or 4 other prototype games in the exact same niche, trying to do some of the exact same things. So I took my game and put it on a shelf. It's still sitting there to this day. I might revisit it one day, but I had realized that at that moment, the time had already hit. I was behind the curve on that by at least 6 months to a year, and by the time my game came out, it would have just looked like a rehash of those games. That's not a place you want your game to be. Maybe you look at the market and you realize that there isn't anyone else doing the sort of game that you are trying to make. That's a good place to be. Maybe you'll be the one to set a new trend. It's also a dangerous place to be. Maybe you're forging down a path that no one's really interested in. Those are risks you have to weigh as a game designer. You have to kind of decide, is this the direction I want to go? Is this the direction other people have already tread? Do I want to find my own path, or do I want to go with the herd? There's no right answer here. As a game designer, you have to look at what's out there and what you believe is fun and exciting and decide whether or not that's something you want to explore and whether or not you think there's enough people out there to make it worth creating. The ultimate goal here is to make the right game at the right time for the right audience. That's the trick. That's kind of one of the hardest parts of this whole biz. So, that's about all I have to say on finding and analyzing your market for this video. I hope you've been enjoying these. I will be releasing another video this coming Wednesday, so keep an eye out for that. I've also been playing a little bit of Pathfinder Kingmaker, so if you want to see some live plays of the Pathfinder creator playing the video game, you can catch those on my channel as well. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more, and get out there and make some great games.